Thanks for joining me today, Tsahi. You know, sometimes I long for the good old days in the early 2010s when we thought WebRTC was going to be so easy. Just drop a
Yeah,
little JavaScript in, you've got a video chat app. But a lot's changed since then. Maybe not entirely for the better. I don't know. What do you think? Has WebRTC become too complicated?
I think it's still the same. You still write the same piece of code and you still drop it there and everything is fine.
Yeah.
Um, I think the problem is kind of elsewhere, and it's not necessarily a problem. When we started out, I was working a lot with HTTP and other signaling protocols where the thing was, and I was very conversant in HTTP. It's like the protocol today, and you can do things in gazillion different ways.
Hmm.
So there were different ways to start a call. You can do the setup through Rust messages, and then there was H.264 and signaling over Q931, and you could do it with it and without it, and like lots and lots of different options. And whenever we had to take the protocol stack implementation and actually test it before launching and updating a version for a customer, that would be months and months of work, just going over a lot of different configurations. And then something like WebRTC comes out. There's Opus. That's it. Yes, there is G711, but nobody is using that except some call center vendors, and I still don't know why till today.
Right.
And then they had VP8. That's it. That was it. Nothing else. There was a fight, and they had to add H.264. Fine, that's okay. But that was the end of it. It was nothing more, nothing less. And it was with SRTP. So you had security and privacy. And that was intentionally mandatory. So you couldn't say I don't want it. And I remember in the first 2 or 3 years, all of the messages that came was, can I use unencryption? Can I use encryption? Why is it encrypted? Can't I remove that as an option? And the answer was, no, you can't.
Right.
And that was just great because, it simplified a lot. Now, fast forward to today, we know a lot more about the things that can be done. We have more codecs simply because time went by, and yes, VP8 is still nice, but VP9 is better, and H1 is even better than VP9. So you want better codecs. And we have some new techniques like RED for dynamic encoding on audio, which we didn't have before. And there's more use of things like forward correction inside the video part, and there's better packet loss concealment, and better band optimization, echo cancellation. And there's a lot of different ways to build the whole backend, simply because we know more of what can be done. So we can use simulcast or SBC or none of these and do mixing. And it's not that these didn't exist before, some of them didn't, but I think that the use cases became so nuanced that we actually want to pick and choose the specific configuration and optimization that we're doing in each and every step of the way,
Exactly.
and to squeeze the lemon as much as we can. So it's like it was good enough. It is still good enough, but we want something better.
Hmm.
And part of it is because the large companies, let's say Google Meet, is doing a lot better. And then a lot of the complaints is, well, Google Meet works better. Why isn't my application as good as that?
Hmm.
So that's one of these things that you hear quite a lot. It was Zoom, oftentimes. Now I hear more about Google Meet being compared to my WebRTC application. Um, so we came to a point where it became very complex, but it's hard to say if that's because WebRTC became more complicated over time, which it did, okay, or because we're trying to get more out of WebRTC today than we used to 10 years ago.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's where, like, your comment about the nuances of the use cases, I think is key to this, because it does depend on the use case, right?
Yep.
WebRTC was envisioned for things like Google Meet more often, and more has been added to it. And if you're building a simple meeting application, it's probably still simple to use. If you're trying to
Yep.
use it in a lot of other use cases, like I was asking my team, what do you find most complicated about it? And it was still, firewalls and still scaling for large conference calls, scaling for broadcast, right? Another thing is it's often not just WebRTC. So sometimes the complication doesn't have anything to do with WebRTC so much as the things you're trying to connect it with, right? You're trying to bring in an RTMP stream with OBS. You're trying to integrate with SIP for telephony, right?
Or an LLM.
And exactly. Now you've got voice AI, LLMs into the mix. Exactly. So, and so I think for certain use cases, still pretty simple, and in fact, simpler than it was 10 years ago. Really, if we're honest, let's not sugarcoat the past. In the past, we had more browser issues to worry about, right? We don't worry about that so much now.
And there's a lot less browser issues, but then you don't need to install a turn server either. You can just go and use one of, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 different managed turn services that are out there.
That's true. Yeah. You still need it, but you have more choices for it. I mean, it makes me think this is a little bit like in last month's episode of WebRTC Live, we were talking about media over quick, right? So, that's an example where for some use cases, you could say that WebRTC has become too complicated, perhaps, and so doing things with web transport, media over quick, even though they may be in some ways they're like lower level and more complicated to work with, but for certain use cases might be better. So maybe if WebRTC feels too complicated, is that kind of the alternative to look at? Is just look at some of those unbundled WebRTC solutions?
I'd say first of all, no. Because I do things with WebRTC and I want people to come to me, but
right.
For the most of us, it's too early.
Yeah,
that's the main reason. Ask me a year or two from now, maybe the answer will change. It probably will to some extent.
Sure.
Then it would depend on the exact use case and what you want to do with it. I remember there's a guy called Jeff Atwood he was a really good blogger, and he wrote about software engineering. And he had this, I think it was Jeff Atwood's law, which was something like, whatever can be written with JavaScript will be written with JavaScript. And
right.
The point of it is that I don't care how much complicated it's inside and what I'm going to do to just make it ugly, as long as it works on the surface in a simple way. So I don't care what WebRTC does. I don't care how the infrastructure looks. If that's going to solve my problem and the ecosystem is there in place, we're going to use it. Why? Because there is nothing better today. Yes, go do things with web transport. That means going back 10 or 15 years from today and saying, well, but it only works on Chrome, and even there are bugs, and we can't really use it, and there's a problem when I use WebAssembly to do the echo cancellation that I wanted because it's not working exactly as I wanted. It depends which world you want to be in.
Right.
And the people that are very enthusiastic about something like media over quick are the ones that like to build stuff from scratch. And
sure.
like open the engine and see what happens inside. I'm one of them. So that would be, if I had to build something from scratch today, I would go use web transport. Why? Because it's interesting and it's fascinating and it's something new and it's almost the exact same protocols and capabilities because it's still using codecs and there's still going to be a jitter buffer and we're still going to need echo cancellation there and packet loss concealment for their correction, but we can do it all over again.
Right.
And do it better this time because we're smarter. Okay?
Right.
So that's going to be fun to do as an engineer.
Yeah.
But if I were someone that needs to run a business, hell no. I mean, I would put that on the CTO group as a research work for something that we will need to be ready for 2 or 3 years from now. Because there's a point in having things that work.
Yeah.
On a different note, I remember talking, it was 15 years ago, I worked at Amdocs for 3 years. And then Node.js just started out. It was the best thing ever. You could do things quickly and build, APIs and gateways and stuff. And there was a very good system architect there. The guy that you would say, well, if I open a startup, I'm going to take him with me as, the first engineer and as a co-founder. And he was with me for the things that I was doing there as a product manager. And I came to him and said, why aren't we using Node for that specific project that we had, which was a kind of an API gateway for all of the products of the company? Then he said something like this. He said, at times that we have around 10,000 engineers. The programming language that we use here is Java.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we now introduce something like JavaScript for the backend, we're not going to have anyone that will be able to maintain that. Not in the product team, not in the services team, not and nowhere in the company. So picking that kind of a technology would not work for us. So when you go and pick something like media over quick web transport, you also need to think about the skill set that you're going to have in that company or that you already have. Do they meet the needs of using something that new? And that's a question to ask, especially when you go and look, the companies that complain about WebRTC are doing that because they don't have the skill set to do it with WebRTC. And WebRTC has been with us for 14 years. So how would something new that doesn't exist would have the skill set of the developers that are so enthusiastic of using that because they hate WebRTC for it? So it just doesn't compute for me that thing. Now, I'm not against web transport and media over quick. I think it would be the best thing ever for specific use cases, which are in a way a lot bigger than what we're doing with WebRTC today. Let's be frank.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It also it's a lot flexible. At least web transport, we can do it with also with higher latencies and provide better media quality at that time latency that we're looking at. So there's a lot of potential there. But then what is the timeline? When do you want to have that available? Is that today because I have a product that I want to ship, let's say end of this year, beginning of 2026? Or is that because I have a dream for something that should happen in 2028?
Right.
So
Right.
that's
And then you need twice the engineers, right? Because you're going to build the WebRTC version for now. And if it is a use case that will work better with web transport and media over quick in the future, you might need a separate team starting to work on that, but not quite having that as your production version yet. I mean, it does all come back to the nuance of the use cases, I think, for sure, is incredibly important here. So what's the answer? Is WebRTC too complicated? No, but depends on your use case. But maybe it's good that it is good that we're integrating with so many things and making it complicated, that it's widespread enough now that it seems this complicated sometimes.
Yes, is WebRTC complicated, or the use cases that we're trying to achieve are now more complicated?
Right, exactly. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing. Excellent. All right. Well, as always, Tsahi, thanks for sharing your insights with us today. To learn more about Tsahi's work, you can check out bloggeek.me. To learn more about future episodes of WebRTC Live, check us out at WebRTC.ventures. Thank you, Tsahi.
Thank you, Arin.